I know teachers right now are into their 40s who are still paying college loans off.
The people that aren't in education complain about what we're not doing in education. You're like, all right, so the people that are doing cool stuff, you almost have borderline a moral obligation to say, all right, this is what I'm doing then.
Let me ask you a very quick question. Is it easier to get a passport than it is to substitute teach?
Yep, like be lazy. Well, if I'm training people to be teachers, be lazy. Yeah, shut up and let them do it.
There's two emotions that I straddle, right? Is hope and worry. So I'm worried to death about kids, but I'm super hopeful about the future.
Education wants the instant gratification. They want the weeds. They don't want the trees.
CTE is coming gangbusters for the traditional, practitioners who don't want to even entertain moving things around for the sake of efficacy.
Do we need as much time as we need to do school?
I mean, if you're asking a 14-year-old, they're going to tell you a weekend will be fine. But no, I want to challenge kids.
If you're about to listen to this podcast, buckle up.
You're listening to the Disrupt Education podcast. Here are your hosts, Peter Hostrawser and Alli Dahl.
All right, welcome back to the Disrupt Education podcast. I'm Peter Hostrawser. That is Alli Dahl. How are you doing, Alli?
I'm good. I've had some start of the week interesting endeavors in the subbing world. I actually have. So I've been intentionally picking different grades, different schools, different backgrounds to kind of really. It's partly just because I love being in the classroom, and also it's partially research for the podcast. Yeah. And it's so interesting what I've been finding. I'm subbing in the districts and nearby districts where I grew up in Minnesota. So it's I didn't teach in Minnesota, I taught in Missouri. And so there's a different feel when you're in your hometown and you're around educators that you could have grown up with, right? I don't there's so much variety.
Yep.
And the one thing that I will say that I have been noticing at being a guest teacher is what they call it, is the expectations that the teacher sets up ahead of time and the leadership expectations that are established in a building make a tremendous difference for anyone visiting that building. And I know that leads into our conversation today. So I'm just I'm excited to hear from our guests and what they have to say, because I'm there in all types of different schools, but being on the ground in the classroom, working with students from kindergarten all the way up to 12th grade is what I have been exploring. It has been a wild ride. I'm subbing again on Friday. But yeah, it's been good.
Yeah, I think this is going to be a great conversation going into summer and a traditional kind of schedule to get some people really thinking about different ways. These two are OGs in Disrupt Education. Yeah, I called you guys that. We have Simon and Jeff with us. How you guys doing?
Outstanding. Thank you for having us today.
Yeah, doing great. It's great to be back, Peter. Thank you so much.
Oh, 100%.
When so glad to see you on the podcast and bringing the juice that we know that schools need and deserve.
Oh man, we had a fiery right before this conversation, right before we started recording. I just had to record. So can you guys give a little bit of a background of who you are, what you're about, and maybe your own education path and how you got to be there? I know that's a loaded question, but we'll start with you, Jeff.
Sure. So I was a terrible student. I'll start there. And it wasn't that I was so much a bad student. It's just that I wasn't shaped properly for the education system. Yeah. It was really focused on churning out certain types of students. And, I was not shaped that way. And so, traditional education was a very painful process for me. When I finally did get out of school, which was ironic, I was halfway through my master's degree when I realized that the only one having me be in school right now was me. And so I literally, in middle of a international business class, I kind of closed my book quietly, took all the things out of my bag that I knew were mine and I'd want for the rest of my life, and left everything else and walked out the class, and that was it. And from there, I mean, I was basically a serial entrepreneur. And it wasn't until about 10 years into my career when I finally had reached the point where I was like, okay, maybe I can give, corporate America a chance. And I started getting into the project management world, which I was also a really bad project manager. Turns out that there's a lot of rules that no one can really explain to you why why in any given corporation they're done that way, which kind of led me on the path of, doing digital transformation, lean agile thinking. And ultimately, I got into a professional career of leading agile transformations in Fortune 500 companies, working with leadership, working with teams across the organizations, helping them reorganize around knowledge work, which is much different from rote or factory work, and it requires a different set of skills, a different mindset, a different leadership approach. And so working with those organizations, some government organizations, and it really wasn't until the beginning of the pandemic when things went into lockdown that it became aware education could not pivot. And the question was, okay, well, why aren't we doing this kind of work, this kind of transformation work in education, which is how LEAF became the Learning Educational Agile Framework. Essentially, we put together a framework and methodologies that are intended for educational institutions. They're student focused and centered by nature, and they're to help institutions run a more lean, agile management style and actually start bringing that approach and that mindset into the classrooms. I'll let Simon share a little bit about how we got together in the lab. But ultimately Simon and I met at the Boston University has an Agile Innovation Lab, and I was there exploring two things: what's going to be the future of the agile transformation consulting industry, and how does agility make its way into the classroom, into education. And that's where I met Simon.
Love it. Love it. And then the explosive relationship happened. Here's Simon.
I would say it was a long fuse. So I basically, had an educator for a dad. So I had this role model who was just one of those teachers who had high standards, but also kept it loose in the classroom. And it was funny, I was recently with him and my son, and he was just kind of telling me stories about former students of his who are now in their 40s. And sort of keeping in touch. I was like, oh, right. That's the thing about being a classroom teacher when you're one of those teachers, Alli, to your earlier point, who gets that student really interested in varieties of thinking, just all that, just acceptance of difference. Not as better, but just as part of a learning process. So anyhow, I basically left college and got into education as a classroom teacher, teaching the two things I love the most, which are U.S. history and economics. Mm-hmm. I worked in independent schools, not because the pay was crappier than public schools, but because I got to work more. And by that, I mean, actually be a coach, be a house parent, be an advisor, have these other roles that really got me in environments with kids that went beyond just the regular workday. And so I was drawn to that. And most people think that, like fancy schools, private schools, they must pay their teachers better. Not for the most part. You do it because of the autonomy and the purpose and the presence of kids, some of whom are just like OG kids who are like, I'm going to take the most out of this opportunity that I've got of getting into this independent school, and I'm going to freaking run with it. I'm going to do something awesome. Mm-hmm. And when you are around those kids, as a classroom teacher for about 10 years and then another 15 years as a senior administrator, as an academic director and as a head of school, I just got this real appreciation for what the world of digital has allowed schools and school people to do with their students, to really make their lives better in non-stupid, non-shallow ways. That are relatable to my dad. Old school project-based learning. He was like a grant. What was that? Schools. Anyhow, just like student centered, genuinely student centered. And to Jeff's point about sort of his path, the thing that we saw together was, and just like wanted to puke about, was needless waste in schools, huge amounts of unnecessary money spent to just cover people's asses, and just sustain a political environment that wasn't, again, we understand why we got there. It's not like anyone's wrong. We've just got to be like, enough of that. Let's try this, because the stakes are different now, and we have tools, and digital allows us to do new things that are disruptive. And the hard thing is to get leaders comfortable with being part of it instead of it becoming the usual antagonism. In any case, to be more specific, while I was a head of school, I got this just incredible professional development experience. Several of them through a really engaged board and a supportive board, through a really hustling admin team of a small school that didn't have a lot of money, but aimed high. And so I got to join a handful of other similar independent school leaders in the National Association of Independent Schools Innovation Strategy Lab, where a visionary guy named Tim Fish, and we should totally tag Tim and NAIS in this, just allowed us to get a lot of time with really interesting thinkers and doers. And in particular, Bob Mesta and the Rewired group, which NAIS brought in to help us heads of school actually do things in different ways. And in a sort of lighthearted but serious way, kind of kick the legs on these older structures that, were clearly just not really helpful and really not optimized for the care that the adults in the buildings actually had for the young people who are also in those buildings.
You guys are saying a lot of buzzwords that I'm sure we can dig into. I'm really interested in, like, you're talking about like do things differently in school. The digital world has exploded and transformed schools. And, I was just subbing in classrooms that don't even have devices, right? And there's pros and cons to that, but right, like, you also mentioned this knowledge work versus factory work, and I think those two things are like linked. So if you want to kind of like dig in there, Simon, Jeff, whatever is kind of coming top of mind, because I'm really interested in like the work that you do with Leaf and how that kind of ties into all these little bombs you just dropped.
Sure. So I guess what I'd say is also the other thing that's really important, just again, respecting that lots of schools don't have devices. Got to be on stickies. The thinking can sit on stickies as easily as a device screen. Totally does not have to be high tech, high cost. It has to be high touch. It has to be high thought. It has to be high, fidelity for the learners. It does not have to be techie. But it's the tech mindset. It's the teams outperform, individuals. It's prima donna stuff is too expensive. It's sort of marching to your death as a school administrator is just a waste of humans. As noble as it is, it's just a waste of humans in the end. And Jeff, I think you're on mute.
I was going to say, when you think about it at the end of the day, Alli, it's really the world that's turned digital. It's not so much the schools, right? The schools aren't keeping up, but how do we prepare students to enter this new digital age where the work is different, right? It's now no longer about, can you sit at a station and do that same thing mindlessly throughout the day, where you take slot A and you put it into tab B and then you move it along. And that is what rote work is, where you can literally check your brain at the door because you're doing the same thing every day. There's no change, versus where we are today in a digital economy where the workers are knowledge workers. Every day, even if you work in a factory, you may have to solve a new problem. There's a new issue with the line, a new type of products coming in. There's an improvement that has to be introduced. How do you think that way, right? What it takes to unlock rote workers, it's a simple formula: reward and punishment. Do more and we'll give you more. Do less and we'll find someone who can do more. Knowledge workers is a completely different formula. right? In the workplace, you first have to remove the conversation of money. People shouldn't have to worry about, can I pay my bills? Can I afford the things that I need to, for my family and have a future? But once that's been resolved, it really only does take three things. First is purpose. Who are we doing this for? Why is this the thing that we're doing? And why is that so important that it get done right now? Right? Purpose. Give people access to the tools and equipment and knowledge they need to solve the problem. And then as leaders, get out of the way and give them the autonomy to solve the problem. Now you can do that in a classroom also. The knowledge workers are the students. The output is the learning objectives. Simon.
Well, so you listed three things there, and the third one, leaders understanding that really true heroism is knowing when to get out of the way, is alien to a lot of teachers and to a lot of school cultures. However, it's not alien to the armed services. And I would just put in a plug for, hundreds of millions of dollars have been spent in agility in the armed services. And I think that's a investment in humans. And I would include, my own cousins as beneficiaries of this, are really understanding ways to have, and this is, I think, maybe particularly the Marines, but I apologize to everyone in the other services if I'm getting this wrong. There's a different mindset, at least at the inception of the Marines, that was this other way of working. And it was brought into being because they knew they needed structures that were definitely structures that got the job done and were adaptive once the fog of war really, hit the field. And yet winning was still what needed to happen.
Yeah, and really Captain David Marquette, retired Navy, really talks about this in his whole leadership through intent, where everybody knows what the mission is, what success looks like, and if a leader's job is to make sure that everybody has what they need, right, to be successful and has the autonomy to get it and they understand what the purpose is, right, then what you really accomplish by stepping out of the way is you create more leaders. You move the solutioning of the problem closer to where the knowledge is the greatest. And that is a very military, concept that's now used across the entire spectrum of the US military, leadership by intent, right? And there's no reason it can't be. I mean, we prove that it can be used in the classroom. It can be used anywhere.
So
I
yeah,
have
go
to
ahead.
ask though, like directly on this. So like I'm in the classroom and I've never done this. Like I just want to know, like brass tacks, like where does it start? Like what's one thing that our listeners who are like, I don't know what that looks like, that's in the clouds. Like what is something they could do right now that they would feel like, I understand this?
So one of the things that, and this is actually a workshop that we've put together for this kind of occasion. It's like, hey, if you want to start this in one simple thing, start with purpose in your classroom. You're getting ready to go in to teach, start a new unit next week. Great. Instead of just introducing it the old way, introduce it in a new way. Here's the purpose behind what we're going to cover and what you're going to learn over the next 6 weeks. You talk about who it's important to, not just it's important to you because you got to graduate. It's important to me because my check is tied to whether or not my class succeeds. No. Who does it really matter to that your 3rd grade class understands triangles? Or your 8th grade class understands civics, or your 10th grade class understands whatever they're studying in science, right? Who does it really matter to? What problems can actually be solved, right? What are the things that they're going to be able to do and why that's so critical? And if you start with that, that's one more small thing that a teacher can try to see if the students for themselves can say, oh, and you know what else? What about this? And what about this? And really start to see themselves in the lesson.
Diamond, you had something to add there, man.
Yeah, and so the only thing I would say is just, again, to keep it at that super duper practical level. As a teacher, consider is anyone in my class able to do co-design of the assessment outcomes and like the standards here? Can I work with my students to generate learning proofs that are not just me handing them to them, but invite them into a conversation about what would be really good learning proofs? Could you ever use this in any other way? Just one small thing, right? Co-design of the assessment at the end. And then you're inviting kids into a trusted conversation that says, look, we're going to figure the world out together. And I don't know everything right now because I can't.
This reminds me, and Alli, we've had this conversation. I might even brought this up on the last podcast with us, Simon, where if I knew this one young guy who was a blacksmith, I would have learned calculus.
Yeah, totally.
Period, right?
Exactly.
Like that's
Yep.
And so I mean, it's so interesting to me because one of the good luck things that I get to do, I don't know if it's by design, because I get to help people, young people, build their professional selves as well as, you know, their academic selves. The academic selves is that kind of, we're going to keep Simon back in Sicily there, cursing up a rainstorm. But moving forward, you know, like I get to tell, like the purpose is there. The purpose is you. The purpose, you know, so it's so easy. What like I want to kind of go build a little bit off of what Alli is asking. So I'm a high school educator, secondary educator, right? And let's say, you know, 6th through 12th grade. People argue fundamentals, blah, 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 but I know where you're going to go with that. But what does it look like in a math class where somebody's just killing it? Like you see it like, okay, the teacher has gotten out of the way. The purpose is clear. The why is there. The who, why is all these things are clear. What have you guys seen that has just knocked it off the charts?
You know, the word I'm going to use to sum it up, because Simon, you've often expressed this to me when you've been over at the elementary school, is it looks a little bit like chaos.
Yeah.
Right? Because you don't see students sitting in seats. You don't see a teacher sitting in the front of the room. What you see is students, some by the wall, some are up against the thing, some are writing on stickies, some are putting stuff on walls, some are running around the room grabbing things. The teacher's maybe not in the room, right? Because they've got other things to do, right? And you know, the teacher doesn't have to come in and go, today we're going to do this, but it's literally the chaos starts from the moment the bell rings.
Well, and the chaos is nothing other than curiosity bouncing against the walls of the time box that the teacher sets up in advance and is like, okay, bounce it out in this time box, you know, and we're just going to fire up the curiosity and purpose and think about how do we tell the story of our life to somebody else? How do we tell it to someone in the past? How might we tell it to someone in the future? How might we use these standards about blah, 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 blah to include ourselves in the learning so it's authentic, purposeful, it can have high standards, but is not just, you know, treating students like turkeys at a freaking pate factory.
Oh, you have, maybe you mentioned this before we started, or maybe it was at the beginning because I wrote it down, but there's a lot of stuff in schools, and, you know, you're kind of building this idea that, you know, we want knowledge work. We want to kind of use the brain muscle. And I see, especially now as a sub, not like even more so, that as soon as something is like different or out of sequence, or there's a guest in the room, it's an opportunity to check out. And like, you know, I don't like being a babysitter, but at times, you know, it's like, that's kind of what I am as a guest teacher if the teacher didn't leave anything. But like, even as an educator in the classroom full time, there was plenty of stuff in school that like I didn't think added value. And you guys kind of are mentioning things that, you know, maybe don't add value. And like, it's 2025. So like, how do we start eliminating things that don't add value? I'm like, what, you know, for leaders and for teachers, like what are some things that we can think about in that kind of capacity on the other side of it.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, as a basic thing, basic sort of response there, every school has priorities. Never met a school that didn't have a very long list of priorities. Rightfully so. Focus is important. And in some schools, social emotional learning, especially a couple of years ago coming out of COVID, really needed to get hit on the accelerator. And no one had any tools for doing that in a sort of cost-effective way that didn't see the teachers having to spend more energy in adjusting than was in the value of the work, right? Everyone had the right intention, they just couldn't lean out the time usage. So this is social emotional learning going on for a team that was a very fractious group of students, learning to be kind to each other and communicate in making nothing other than some of the duct tape wallets that are in this toolbox. So I worked with the teacher and we combined SEL stuff with other lessons and other content in ways that address the particular needs of this group. And the school psychologist was like, whoa, what is going on here? Did we cover the standards? Yeah, it was fine. But what did we accomplish? The way more important thing of them coming out of this year as a group feeling like they had efficacy as a group.
And when working with leaders, surprisingly, we use a lot of the same techniques and approaches. So we're working with a school right now, and one of the things that they're kind of focusing in on is, how do we improve our enrollment? And so much the same, we simply created for them a value flow. Well, let's talk about what the process looks like. Okay, well, first people have to go ahead, they go through, they schedule this, they do all these things that have to happen, and then at some point they diverge. They're either coming in on a regular path or they have to apply for financial aid. Yeah. And then once all that's done, they go to school records, wait list, right? And so by using these approaches that, again, have been perfected over the last 20, 30 years in industry, even more, now simply applying them to this may not resonate well with the audience, with the business of school, right? And just realizing that, this is systems thinking at its finest. Schools are just a system, right? They're here to serve, society, to ensure that our young people can solve the problems that they're going to have to deal with. Right. So using these same approaches with leaders in schools does make it so much easier in the classroom when the students are doing it. Because you know what? Now they see that, when I walk by the principal's office, the principal's got a board. I see in the teacher's lounge there's a board where the teachers are managing some of their work. And I see the custodian has a board. This must be how people work today, because this is how people work today.
And it's how you would find 90% of the world's software getting made, how Toyota gets cars made. You're like, this is not stuff we made up. This is rather a re-engineering and reapplication of, how to solve complex problems collaboratively in a school environment that's a learning environment in the way that any business, which only lives on delivering actual value to end users, can only exist. So I don't want to reduce school to a business or suggest that business and school have to be the same thing, but we've all got bills to pay.
Right.
You can learn from each other, and man, this is so refreshing, because as an educator, I'm very much a systems thinker. Like, what is happening here? Why? You start to look at these things. I would say your traditional kind of outdated educational systems right now, what we do is we will give the students a Google form and say, spit it back to us, and then we will change it, right? And so when you see these systems, these complex problems, and bringing students in to them to help figure them out, and not just hey, Simon, hey, Jeff, what do you guys think on a scale of 1 to 4? And then we're going to go and then we're going to put that up on a chart, and then we're pretty much not going to do much with it, right? So can you, yeah, tell a little bit more of a story where you saw a system or a school change, maybe in an area, maybe there was a complex problem in an area like a cafeteria or a curriculum area. Yeah, kind of unpack a story there so people can kind of, gather that information and say, oh, okay, this is the way.
Sure, sure. Um, I guess what I would say is, in independent schools, at least, I would point to, and this is just going to sound kind of gross and self-serving. I happen to volunteer on a school board. The school board uses some of these
Mark
methods.
Twain, man.
Yeah, and I happen to coach the school. Full transparency, I am their transformation coach.
There
I
we
coach
go.
the board and the head of schools and the staff as well. So
All right.
So that would and again we can in future shows or we can like demo what does the work product look like, what does the information radio look like. We could also point to work at independent school, the Nativity Miguel Coalition, and work we've done with them. A whole bunch of different contexts, but it's really important because too often people fixate on the tools and they don't spend enough time learning the context. That they have good ideas, but they implement poorly in a different building because X, Y, and Z of 9 million things that could make it not work the same way there. So you have to kind of be a tinkerer, which means you can't be 100% right in advance.
right.
And if your leadership environment doesn't allow that, it's going to be kind of hard because that sort of experiment energy and mindset is just not going to be there.
So if you take it,
yeah.
I was just going to say, if you take the example of the school coalition, the Nativity Miguel Coalition, when we started working with their board of trustees, right, they were on a cycle that, to do their 5-year planning, it took them a year to get the plan in place, and then they could start executing on it. Right, we got engaged with them a few years back, and just by shifting around their mindset about how they think about their approach to strategic initiatives, we actually got the board delivering on some of those 5-year commitments within 6 months. So not even waiting for the entire plan to be completely set, they simply knew where the vision, where they were going. And they were able to get over the fact that they needed the perfect plan to get there. And it was okay to start experimenting and iterating and incrementing their way.
It's actually really businesses do this. So my husband, he's has sold ERP, and having learned the sales cycle and everything. Okay, so you buy software and then there's all of this money that goes into implementing the software that is unique to every single business, and getting someone live, meaning the software is up and running in the business, is a big deal in ERP. You lose millions and millions of dollars if you cannot do this. Right. So your point of okay, you guys have your Leaf Lab and you have this thing. You're saying that we can't just give you the software or give you this and then it's going to be the exact same in every school. It's not going to be live, right? I think that's something that's really bothered me with ed tech that you kind of made me realize is that ed tech solutions and technology solutions oftentimes are well, here it is, here's how it works, and it should just magically poof work for your system because we demoed it to you. We showed you the functions and what it can do, but they don't really know who's using it, why they'd be using it, right? The in the classroom day to day, who is the learner, right? So how does your approach kind of fit into that? And, this idea of, it's really under agile learning and adaptive leadership, but also I think this is under just how to be an innovator in education in 2025. Like what is that kind of bringing to mind for you guys in
Sure.
terms of relationship with business?
Yeah, no. I mean, and that really is it. It's a great question, and at the end of the day, right? What we're really striving for is for people to get that it's rarely when you're dealing with complex or chaotic problems is the tool going to ever be the solution, right? You actually need the mindset. You need to understand how you figure things out even before you can ever start applying tools.
And that's an error made in school change transformation 80% of the time, which is why change efforts exhaust people because they're taken prematurely. And I've made that my mistake myself several times, and I still make it in smaller ways now.
Right.
In little like even throwaway asides here and there. Have to just continually, and this is why working with a team like Jeff and our network is helpful, because it's easy to slip. And I don't mean that in like an AA way. What I do mean is it's easy to fall back into that mindset because we were all raised in it.
Mm-hmm.
It's okay. No one's at fault, and it's not going to get us and our kids where we need to go.
Right. And at the end of the day, I mean, we've had this experience ourselves where we're working with the school, but they get so focused on the tool being the solution. And they're like, oh, well, now that we have the tool, it's like, well, great. But, and it reminds me of like a really old joke, which is, a newspaper is, they've had a guy who's worked the presses there for 60 years. He's finally retiring, right? He retires, and 5 years later, lo and behold, the machine breaks down. Everybody's trying. Nobody can figure out what to do. They call back, the person who retired, and they said, can you fix it? And he's like, I can fix it, but you just have to pay my bill, whatever it is. And they said, look, we can't run. Whatever the bill is, we got. He comes in, right? They have all these tools and everything lined up. He pulls out of his pocket just a tiny little Phillips head screwdriver, walks all the way back to the back of the machine, puts his hand in, twists the screw, comes back, says, okay, that's it, it's fixed. Flips the switch, the machine's working. He gives them a bill of $100,000. They go, $100,000 to turn the screw? He goes, oh, I didn't know you wanted an itemized bill. Okay, itemized bill. 25 cents to turn the screw, $999 to know which screw to turn.
Yeah.
Right? And it's all about, it's not the tool. You can have all the tools in the world, but if you don't understand the system, and when you're dealing with complex and chaotic, you don't understand the system. So if you don't understand how to learn and sense and, to even get to know the system, you're lost.
So if you think about school is there to help create forms of knowledge. Some of that knowledge is explicit knowledge. Some of it's tacit. Tacit knowledge is what lets you charge the $9 million, 900, whatever that, right? It's knowing which screw to turn. And that only works in that one building. That has allowed that vulnerability to persist for some set of reasons that we all agree isn't really helping. So that's not, it's just like, it's systems, Peter, like you're saying. Systems they exist, they're fine, and we just need to not get complacent because our kids don't deserve complacency in a world where we've all got bills to pay. Yeah. And so I was showing this to another group of leaders earlier, and it encapsulates just a humane way to get people on the change journey with you that doesn't involve fault.
Yes.
That invites people to team, and specifically to invite coaches and these other non-push based ways of learning that are, see the pull of curiosity and these other things. Let us go through the difficult work of actually learning how to do things differently. It's not easy. We shouldn't sugarcoat it for people. Our students are worth the work. And with a good coach, it actually can be kind of fun because you just learn how to get that mindset in a playful way that we know teachers can really do. The teachers who are really in it for the kids, they're willing to stretch and learn ways to play with their kids so their kids don't just do the superficial thing They don't even just do the improved way, right? They get to the end, they're like, oh, as a kid, maybe it's me. I can be better. I can have a better future. There's some things so that there's this increasing impact over time. Teachers let kids roll through those waves and support them through them on the way to becoming better kids.
Yeah. And, we talked about it before. When you give students purpose, they're willing to take on any challenge as long as they can see the purpose in or themselves in the purpose. And the lab is the perfect example of that, right? We bring together students and we put them on cross-functional teams, which means that you might have a 10th grader with a PhD student. Doesn't matter. Doesn't matter. They're going to work together. They each have different skills that they bring to the challenge. And then we're going to show them challenges, not simple challenges. We're going to show them problems that no one has solved before. We're going to show them problems like...
Well, and so just think about like Montessori classrooms are a 3-year spread.
Yep.
The high school to PhD, that's obviously extreme, but Montessori understands that mixed age. And Dave Snowden has talked about this. There's real value in that multi-age collaboration where the elders can mentor the youngers and whatever, you guys know this stuff.
And they're going out and solving complex problems that professionals need solved, but don't have the time to solve them themselves.
Yeah.
And they're doing it because they understand the purpose, right? Oh, we're doing this for the NMC schools. We're doing this for NMC leadership. We're doing this for the students and the families. This is the one that generally gets them hooked, by the way. They love doing stuff for the students and the families, right? They're doing stuff for the funders. They're doing stuff, and the stuff they're doing it's all the same stuff, right? And they're solving very complex business problems.
Yeah.
And
No,
it's good stuff.
So no, this is why, as I was talking to Alli before, this is like, you guys are such like disruptors of education and post COVID, the big, kind of the reveal of what we talked about this before. But there was that aha moment, or an uh-oh moment, or whatever the moment you want to look at it, as, there were people in the system who said, I told you, and here's me. And then they're the calm ones. And then there's the chaotic ones that are trying to figure out what to do and blah, blah, blah. So what I want to do is kind of like, as we, kind of land this awesome, chaotic, amazing stuff. Now, Simon, you mentioned this before when we were talking a little bit about, data and,
Sure.
what is happening with that, the BS is in the data, or, kind of want to unpack that and say, okay, where are we going? We're in 2025 and we're still a lot of places, obviously not the lab in the areas that you guys are working in, but you have, and I respect the heck out of independent schools in these different areas. That there is a little more agility. However, I am lucky, actually. I feel like I'm lucky enough. We still have our complex problems in our system, which I'm on a regular traditional system, but we do have some agility happening. Where do you guys see this going? And let's just say the next year, we have AI bouncing around, which is another tool that, all this stuff, before people are figuring it out, they're like, just use AI, they're now the focus is even more on a tool, I feel like. But where do you guys see this going, and what is the data saying?
I would say a couple things first. I put into the chat some links that people can follow up if they want, if they're curious about any of this stuff. So the thing about the data that's really tricky is it's really hard to run, and Jeff and I have failed in almost not a countless number, but so many grant applications. So where it's going is hard to say, is the short answer, because there's inconvenient math here. And the inconvenient math is specifically the math that makes predictions of certain sorts about where will kids be difficult, because kids don't all grow the same way and the same shape and the blah, blah, blah. And at some level, people don't want to hear that.
Yeah, and then there's also so many different competing factors that really contribute to the chaotic nature of figuring out where it's going to go. When you look at what's going on in workforce development, digital skill badging, and all that, and the potential impact that's going to have on education
Yeah.
next year. I mean, there's the government spending millions. There are overseas, there are governments that have already switched over, right? And they're now all running on learning and employment records, which are going to fundamentally force our schools to shift again the way they think about every single course that they provide every student in this country, right? So with all those factors, it does really become a challenge. But if we look at what's happening, at least here within the United States, we're hoping that, okay, if things are going to continue along with the projection that we're looking at, okay, we're not going to have we're not going to find ourselves in the situation where we keep swinging and missing at a federal Department of Education. We may be swinging and missing at 50 different state departments of education, but that's going to give us a lot more at bats.
Yeah. And I would say, although it's hard to make specific predictions, I think the general trends are getting clearer and clearer. And having screwed around with AIs enough, holy cow. Each one of those AIs can become a companion to a kid in a school at shockingly low cost. That's going to be powerful, and it's going to piss some people off. So, I think that there's going to be, because I'm just a biology nerd, I liken this moment to that of the Cambrian explosion. This massive, I think one of you was talking about sort of, Alli, you're talking about this kind of like diversity of experiences that you had. People doing what you're doing and having those cross-pollination things, that's what's going to make the learning soil thick so that better ways start to come out. Because there's so many smart people in schools who want to make this work. Kevin Kelly talked about the futures here, it's just not evenly distributed. That's all I can tell you. It's out there because people are really committed still at many, many different levels to really getting better ways out there and to partnering with parents. I think, frankly, a lot of what's going to happen is parents are going to start organizing in ways that hopefully are thoughtful, but are really clear in terms of their priorities. Because if the local trust environment is there, and so I say this as my dad was on a local, my daughter goes to public school. My son went to public school. My dad was a public school teacher. So although my personal experience is more in private, many of the constraints that public schools face are similar. The funding source is different, but at the end of the day, parents are taxpayers, just like independent school parents are tuition payers. We're all paying, and they're different environments, different expectations. But there's great stuff happening in schools. There's a school district down in Knoxville doing some very cool stuff. Jeff built some sort of architecture and backbone for them. That's awesome. I can't really talk about it here, but there's lots and lots of people willing to run experiments and invite their kids into it. In part, frankly, because tech parents are like, yeah, well, duh. This is what I see at work. Why wouldn't my kid do this? And this is, just at some level, common sense is going to overwhelm a broken system. And I think we still, as Americans, have a strong belief, really across the political spectrum, that says, we're here for the future and the dream that's yet unrealized.
Yeah, and I guess my hope for the near term or the next year would be, as we continue to run into the groups that are out there, because it's, there are globally a lot of small pockets of people who are doing this kind of work. We believe that there's strength in numbers, and if we really want to, we can't show up as individual companies. We really have to show up as an entire industry here, committed to the future of our children, willing to do what it takes to support educational systems in the hard work of change.
Yeah. Excellent.
So we want to honor your time, of course, and our listeners' time. I just want to be clear, though. I haven't gotten to like any of my questions.
You know what that
Great.
means? Part two.
So good.
Well, I mean, Peter's got us on speed dial, so we're good for as many sessions as you guys want to have.
We are
Yeah.
we're gonna go part two. That's what Alli's telling us.
That
So
is.
Sweet.
Sure.
we're gonna split it right here, but we'll be back with you guys next week. So if you guys want to hang out and stick with the podcast, we will be recording next week's podcast right now, but you guys have to wait a week because that's what we do. We want you to soak it in. So for Alli Dahl and Simon and Jeff, I'm Peter. We'll catch you next time on the Disrupt Education Podcast. That's a wrap on this episode of the Disrupt Education Podcast. Let's keep the momentum going. Be sure to like, subscribe, and share this episode out.
If you want to dive deeper into disrupting education, visit our website at disrupteducationpodcast.com.
Here's the bottom line. We believe real change in education starts locally. It happens when communities come together to rethink learning. If you're an educator, school leader, or organization looking to take action towards real change in education, we are here to help. Reach out and connect.
And we'd love to hear your thoughts on today's episode. So drop us a line wherever you listen. And until next time, take that bold step beyond your comfort zone. Challenge the status quo and be the change education truly needs.
Because at the end of the day, education isn't just about subjects. It's about students. And when we dare to disrupt, the future of learning is waiting.